if you're going to be a successful governor rather than a successful politician, you need to be able to tolerate dissent in your ranks. You need to be able to have differences of opinion. Otherwise, you get groupthink and things go wrong. This is anecdote, not data, but he's not tolerated Diane Abbott, the Labour leader. And when he went to a Kent launch for Labour last week, he didn't see Rosie Duffield, the Canterbury MP, who has taken a different position in the Labour mainstream on transgender stuff. I'm just a little bit worried that Keir Starmer, who will be our next Prime Minister, is he going to tolerate dissent? Is he going to have a broad church of a party? Or is the control freakery that I think he's much more guilty of than Tony Blair? Is that going to be his style of governing?
I want to be clear that my argument that there's a lot exciting about a general election, including this one, is not contingent on the government being kicked out. That may well turn out to be what happens. I think my excitement in my argument rested on the opportunity to decide whether or not that was going to happen. And that, for me, for the purpose of this argument, was enough. And here's another thing, which is it doesn't matter what the plan is, whether there's a very predictable agenda drummed up by spin doctors and campaigners or not. There are always events. Things always come along and spoil all their plans and make you rechange the headlines in the papers and on programmes like this one, like Diane Abbott this evening. When I sat down, she was in a state of limbo, didn't know whether she was going to be a candidate for Labour. Now we know she's not, because the Times is reporting, well, it's been decided, it's been deemed from on high, she's not going to be allowed to be a Labour candidate. This is in from one unnamed Labour MP. This will backfire. Starmer's a massive fool. This is really terrible. I hope she runs as an independent. Rachel, what do you think?
I think the level of awareness, to pick up on what we were talking about a minute ago, that the majority of people have with individual MPs, if it's not their MP, is pretty low.
Diane Abbott, though, sorry to interrupt you, but Diane Abbott's pretty well known.
She is pretty well known, but I think in terms of generally, will this kick the momentum out of the Labour campaign? No. Is it significant and will it upset a huge number of people within Labour? Absolutely yes, especially coming, I've lost track of time, 2.5 weeks since the Natalie Elphicke defection, since Starmer let right-wing Tory MP Natalie Elphicke defect to Labour. And I think the calculation that Starmer, he says this has nothing to do with him, the calculation that some people in Labour are making is that she is a liability, she could be a liability, she is reminiscent of the Corbyn period, which they would really like to try and forget as much as possible, and it would just be easier for everyone if she went away quietly and with dignity and they didn't have to have those conversations. I think the number of people, though, who are going to be outraged by this in the Labour Party and sort of the wider Labour movement, they're probably not going to cause trouble for Starmer in this election that we're going to have in 5 weeks' time, but that bad blood, that sense of resentment, that adds up. And I think it's possible that he is storing up problems for later by alienating a section of the party that he thinks he doesn't need at the moment, but he will need in future.
Right. What do you think? We'll come back to that. Tim, what do you think?
I think Keir Starmer was hoping that Diane Abbott would not tolerate this long period where she was held in sort of abeyance, and she actually clearly wanted to remain a Labour MP. She didn't have a paddy, she didn't walk off, and so the calling of the early election has caused Keir Starmer to have to make a decision to get rid of her. And we shouldn't forget, it's been often said, but it still matters, she was the first black woman MP at a time when racism was a big problem in our country on a scale young people wouldn't recognise. I don't agree with a lot of what she said, and what she wrote in that Observer article that got her the suspension was terrible. But she's a brave woman who's fought for many good causes, and I have a lot of admiration for her in a way. And I thought she had a shadow Home Secretary. I don't think she was at that level. But I think Labour have be fine. I agree with what Rachel said, though. I don't think there'll be any immediate political consequences. But the thing it suggests to me, and it worries me a little bit, is if you're going to be a successful governor rather than a successful politician, you need to be able to tolerate dissent in your ranks. You need to be able to have differences of opinion. Otherwise, you get groupthink and things go wrong. This is anecdote, not data, but he's not tolerated Diane Abbott, the Labour leader. And when he went to a Kent launch for Labour last week, he didn't see Rosie Duffield, the Canterbury MP, who has taken a different position in the Labour mainstream on transgender stuff. I'm just a little bit worried that Keir Starmer, who will be our next Prime Minister, is he going to tolerate dissent? Is he going to have a broad church of a party? Or is the control freakery that I think he's much more guilty of than Tony Blair? Is that going to be his style of governing? Because you need one style to win political campaigns, you need another for governing. And I hope he will listen to people around him, perhaps like Tony Blair, who can warn him of the dangers of that.
John, Rachel and Tim, what I can't understand, says Catherine, is why they've announced the Diane Abbott news today. Well, not quite announced, actually. It was reported exclusively in the Times. But Catherine says, couldn't they have spent tonight dining out on Angela Rayner facing no further action? I don't love or hate Diane Abbott, but the way Starmer's handled this is ugly and unnecessarily cruel. I mean, I did wonder this myself, actually, Tim. I mean, it was the Times that got hold of this story exclusively, but they did get hold of this story. And we just had the news of Angela Rayner not facing any action from the police. You think Labour would much rather, or might in another world, have rather had a focus on that?
Yeah, sometimes I wonder whether these things are planned or something just forced. You know,
Yeah.
that time is incredibly short now to decide who's going to be a candidate or not. And if they're not having Diane Abbott in her seat, they've got to choose someone else. And so they've got a few days to do that. And maybe they just thought, well, it's practically holding meetings, holding selection events. So it may have been completely beyond Keir Starmer's control.
Or was it an accident? Was it something that a Times journalist got hold of, and they weren't intending to get it out today? Because I don't think if you were going to announce this isn't the way that you would do it. And I think there were still talks going on. Basically, we're trying to encourage her to decide not to stand, and it's the breakdown of those talks that have ended up in the situation that we're in. I think even some people are pushing for her to be offered a place in the Lords as a kind of...
You can't ban her from standing for Parliament and then give her a place in the Lords. That sort of...
No, but if you didn't ban her, but if you enabled her to say, I've been an MP for 37 years, it's my time to stand down, thank you to everyone in the party, that would be a very different exit than what has now happened.
We'd have all been very surprised, wouldn't we, if Diane Abbott had decided she's going to step out of Parliament and either cross over to the red benches and the deep leather armchairs, or step back from politics altogether. That's just not the Diane Abbott we think we know.
I mean, I think if there are lots of MPs who, if they were offered the prospect of a place in the Lords, maybe might depart in that way. I'm not saying she has been offered that or she was, but you can see that as people behind the scenes trying to stage manage that exit, because, well, what they didn't want was her running a campaign and kind of saying more things like what she wrote in the Observer letter that got her suspended, and then having to Keir Starmer constantly having to say whether he agreed with them or not. At the same time, though, I think there were questions of whether she was going to try and support Jeremy Corbyn, who's standing as an independent in Islington North. It's awkward for the Labour Party to have her hanging around, and I think that is why there were attempts to try and ease that awkwardness, but it sounds like she wasn't having it because she really wanted to remain a Labour MP.
On this question of Jeremy Corbyn, this seems to be the dog that hasn't barked. You know, the person who led the Labour Party into the last election, Keir Starmer, wanted as Prime Minister, he's been basically chucked out of the Labour Party, standing as an independent. No one seems to really care. You know, the John McDonnell isn't kicking up a fuss. You know, the Corbynistas in the cabinet aren't. We don't seem that interested, but it's quite a phenomenon, really.
Well, maybe Tim, it's just been barking for so long that it just sounds like a dog barking outside in the street somewhere. It just merges into background noise, whereas I really think that is what's going on. That's been going on for so long.
But millions of people generally were, for a period, energised by Jeremy Corbyn. And where have they all gone? They've just now said Labour's OK. What's going to... I find it a really fascinating phenomenon in the fickleness of voters or politics or what. But
some of them just really want Labour to win. And we've talked before about how parties are much, much more disciplined when they sense that they're going to win. And parties where they feel that they're not fall apart and start briefing against each other very viciously, which we've seen with the Conservative Party. So I think some of it is that, particularly, as you say, the shadow cabinet, the people who are uncomfortable with those decisions would also really like to be in the actual government, in the actual cabinet. So, I mean, if you're this close to that as achieving that career political goal, you're not going to throw it away.